The canyon woke beneath heavy gray skies. Snow drifted slowly across the river, while smoke climbed quietly from the morning fires. For a few peaceful minutes, life almost looked ordinary again. Then Clara noticed Takoda's horse, still tied beside the stable, saddled, alone. A cold feeling moved through her immediately. Takoda never left his horse behind. Never. She crossed the snow quickly toward the stable, while the camp slowly woke around her. The rifle rack near the doorway stood half empty, but Takoda's rifle still hung there, untouched. Clara stopped breathing for one terrible moment. Because warriors abandoned horses in battle, men abandoned rifles only when they no longer planned on fighting. Takoda? No answer. Only winter wind moving through the canyon. Nokosi appeared moments later carrying firewood beneath one arm. The older warrior saw Clara's face immediately, then saw the untouched rifle. Silence settled heavily between them. He's gone, Clara whispered. Nokosi lowered the wood slowly. Not surprised. That frightened Clara most. You knew? The older man stared toward the northern ridge. I knew he was thinking about it. Clara's chest tightened painfully. Thinking about what? Nokosi finally looked toward her. Leaving before he destroys this place. The words struck like ice water. Clara shook her head instantly. He would never. He already believes he has. Silence. Below them, children laughed near the schoolhouse. Normal sounds. Warm sounds. But suddenly Clara understood something terrifying. Takoda no longer heard them as proof of life. Only proof of what could still be lost. Nokosi moved toward the ridge slowly. He hasn't slept properly in weeks. The old warrior's voice sounded tired. He blames himself for every grave in this canyon now. Clara stared toward the mountains beyond the snow. Takoda carried guilt like other men carried weapons. Quietly. Constantly. Until eventually it became too heavy to survive. Then Mato came running from the river, carrying firewood far too large for his arms. The boy stopped immediately after seeing Clara. Where's Takoda? Nobody answered quickly enough. Mato's face changed. Not confusion. Fear. Real. Fear. He left. Clara crossed toward him immediately. He just needs time. But the words sounded weak even to her. Mato looked toward the empty ridge. Then quietly. People always leave after bad things happen. The sentence nearly shattered her. Because that was exactly how Takoda thought too. As if broken men should disappear before they hurt anyone else. That evening, Clara sat alone inside the schoolhouse after the children slept. Takoda's empty chair remained beside the stove. His gloves still rested near the wall. The smallest things hurt worst. Outside, snow continued falling across the canyon while distant wolves cried somewhere beyond the cliffs. Clara stared into the fire for a long time, then finally whispered the truth aloud for the first time. He thinks leaving will save us. And somewhere far beyond the mountains. Takoda walked deeper into the storm, believing exactly the same thing. The canyon grew quieter after Takoda disappeared. Not physically. Children still played near the river. Women still cooked beside the fires. Snow still fell softly across the cliffs each evening. But something invisible had changed. Like warmth itself had pulled farther away from everyone. Clara felt it most during mornings. Takoda's place beside the central fire remained empty now. Nobody sat there. Not intentionally. The canyon simply understood some absences carried too much weight. Clara buried herself in work before grief could settle properly. She taught lessons inside the schoolhouse during the day. Repaired blankets beside the older women at night. Helped Nokosi ration supplies during storms. The work never ended. Maybe that was good. Because every quiet moment brought the same terrifying thought. What if Takoda never intended to return? One afternoon, little Evelyn struggled reading again beside the stove. The girl's small hands trembled while sounding out words. Clara smiled gently. You're doing fine. Evelyn looked up nervously. Will Takoda come back before spring? The question nearly stopped Clara's heart. Children always ask things adults avoided. Clara lowered beside her carefully. Yes. Lie. But the little girl needed certainty more than truth. Outside the schoolhouse, Nokosi repaired broken fencing alone beneath gray skies. The older warrior looked exhausted too. Everyone did. That evening, Clara carried fresh stew toward him through deep snow. You haven't eaten. Nokosi accepted the bowl quietly, then finally muttered. He thinks leaving protects people. Clara stared toward the mountains. I know. Nokosi shook his head slowly. No. You understand the words. Not the war inside him. Silence settled heavily. The old warrior looked older lately. Tired in ways sleep never fixed. He buried too many people before he ever found this canyon. Clara lowered her eyes. And now he thinks peace belongs to everyone except him. Nokosi never answered. Because that was true. Later that night, strong winds rolled through the canyon hard enough to shake the schoolhouse walls. Clara woke suddenly after hearing movement outside. Mato. The little boy sat alone beside the dying fire wrapped in blankets. You should be asleep. Mato kept staring into the flames. What if he forgets where home is? The question shattered something inside her quietly. Because that fear already lived inside her too. Clara sat beside the child slowly. Takoda once taught Mato how to track deer through snow, how to carve wood, how to survive storms. But maybe the most dangerous thing he taught the boy was how lonely wounded men could become. Clara wrapped another blanket around Mato's shoulders. He knows where home is. The child leaned quietly against her arm. Then why did he leave it? Outside, winter wind screamed across the canyon ridges. But Clara could not answer. Because somewhere deep down, part of her feared Takoda no longer believed he deserved to stay beside the fire he helped build. Takoda reached the battlefield at dusk. Snow covered the valley in silence. The old war had ended years ago, but some places never stopped feeling dead. Broken wagon wheels still rested half buried beneath frozen dirt. Rusting rifle barrels poked through snowdrifts like bones. The warrior stood motionless for a long time. He remembered the smell first. Gunpowder. Smoke. Blood freezing into mud. Then came the memories. His brother laughing beside. The river days before the battle. His brother screaming later. Then silence. Takoda closed his eyes hard. The wind moved sharply across the battlefield. He finally walked toward the northern ridge where hundreds of nameless soldiers once died beneath artillery fire. Nobody knew his brother rested there. Not Clara. Not Mato. Not even Nokosi. Takoda never brought anyone here. Because some grief became too heavy to speak aloud. Years earlier, after the battle ended, Takoda survived barely long enough to escape Union patrols. He left his brother's body behind beneath smoke and snow. That choice poisoned him ever since. The warrior dropped slowly to one knee beside the frozen earth. For several long moments, he said nothing. Then quietly, I should have carried you home. His voice broke. Takoda lowered his head while snow drifted across his shoulders. And finally, the ghost hunter cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the exhausted grief of a man who spent years surviving instead of mourning. The frontier feared Takoda because they believed he felt nothing. But the truth was far worse. He felt everything. Every grave. Every failure. Every person he could not protect. The weight never left. It only learned how to stay quiet. That night, Takoda built a small fire beside the battlefield alone. For the first time in years, he stopped running from memory long enough to sit beside it. And somewhere very far away beneath canyon firelight, Clara stared into the darkness, feeling something inside her chest hurting without explanation. Like part of her already knew. Takoda was finally standing beside the wound that created him. Mato changed slowly enough that most adults missed it. But Clara noticed immediately. The little boy stopped carving animals beside the fire. Stopped chasing the younger children through snow. Stopped asking bedtime stories inside the schoolhouse. Instead, he watched people. Quietly. Like Takoda used to. One morning Clara found him awake before sunrise sharpening a small knife beside the stable. The sight froze her. Mato. The child looked up quickly. I'm practicing. His voice sounded flat. Too calm. Not like a child. Clara crouched beside him. Carefully. You're too young to carry blades around every day. Mato kept sharpening anyway. Takoda did. The answer hit hard. Because grief always tried turning pain into imitation. Later that afternoon, Nokosi found Mato trying to learn tracking prints alone beyond the river. The old warrior returned with the child near sunset. He followed wolf tracks 3 miles into the hills. Clara's heart nearly stopped. Mato. The boy looked angry instead of ashamed. I needed to learn. Learn what? Mato's eyes suddenly filled with emotion. How to stop people from leaving. Silence. The words felt too old for him. Clara slowly knelt in front of the child. Snow drifted softly through the canyon around them. Mato. But the little boy interrupted her. If I become dangerous enough, maybe nobody leaves again. The sentence nearly broke her heart. Because that was exactly how Takoda once survived. Not through healing. Through becoming feared. Clara pulled the child gently against her coat. Mato resisted at first, then finally collapsed against her while crying silently into the fabric. Children learn survival from the adults around them. And Clara suddenly understood something terrifying. If Takoda disappeared into guilt completely, Mato might spend the rest of his life believing pain should turn men cold instead of honest. That night, Clara stood alone beside the canyon ridge, staring north toward the mountains, toward wherever Takoda wandered beneath snow and ghosts, then quietly into the wind. He still doesn't understand how many people need him alive. And somewhere far beyond the frozen frontier, Takoda sat alone beside a dying fire, believing exactly the opposite. The riders arrived just before sunset. 6 horses, dark coats, long rifles, professional silence. Not drunks, not Boone's reckless leftovers. These men moved carefully, like hunters who expected something dangerous to hunt back. The canyon felt it immediately. Women gathered children near the lower shelters. Warriors stepped closer to the rifle racks. Even the dogs stopped barking. Clara stood beside the schoolhouse, watching the riders descend slowly through falling snow. The leader rode at the front. Tall, clean-shaven, black gloves. The kind of man who looked civilized until you noticed the deadness behind his eyes. He stopped his horse near the central fire. Name's Silas Rourke. Nobody answered. Rourke smiled politely. I'm looking for Takoda. Silence. The wind moved softly through the canyon. Nokosi stepped forward first. You found a canyon instead. Rourke studied the older warrior calmly. Then his eyes moved toward Clara, and stayed there longer than she liked. So the stories were true. Clara's stomach tightened. What stories? Rourke dismounted slowly. That the ghost hunter finally built himself something worth losing. The sentence darkened the entire camp, because everyone understood what it meant. Rourke wasn't here for bounty money. He was here for leverage. One of the younger warriors raised a rifle slightly. Rourke never even looked at him. I didn't ride through a blizzard to start a war. Lie. Men like him always carried war inside them. Clara crossed slowly toward the center of camp. Takoda would have stayed calm here. Measured, still, so she forced herself not to show fear. He's gone. Rourke nodded once. Yes. That's what worries me. The outlaw removed a folded wanted poster from inside his coat. Takoda's face stared back from the paper again. Men are coming. More than Boone ever had. Clara remained silent. Rourke lowered the poster beside the fire. When desperate hunters stop finding the wolf, his eyes lifted toward the canyon around them. They start burning forests instead. Then he climbed back onto his horse. 1 week. The riders turned immediately. Snow swallowed them slowly into darkness. And for the first time since Boone died, the canyon felt haunted again. Nobody slept much after Rourke's warning. The canyon stayed awake beneath storm clouds and rifle smoke. Warriors rotated watches through the night, while children whispered nervously inside the shelters. And Clara felt everyone quietly looking toward her now. Not because she was strongest, because Takoda wasn't there. That frightened her more than the riders. At sunrise, Nokosi found her alone beside the schoolhouse, carrying buckets of water through snow. You should rest. Clara shook her head. If I stop moving, I'll think. The older warrior almost smiled sadly. Yes. That is usually why Takoda never sits still either. The sentence hurt unexpectedly, because she suddenly realized exhaustion had become the only language Takoda trusted. By afternoon, another rider appeared near the southern ridge. White cloth tied to his rifle. Truce flag. Silas Rourke again. This time alone. The outlaw rode directly into camp while everyone watched in silence. His calmness unsettled Clara more than threats ever could. Rourke dismounted slowly, then glanced around the canyon. Children, smoke, shelter, life, beautiful place. Clara kept one hand near the rifle beside the doorway. What do you want? Rourke smiled faintly. The same thing everybody wants. Control. Nokosi stepped closer immediately. You should leave. But Rourke ignored him completely. His eyes stayed on Clara. So the ghost left a woman in charge. The insult landed softly, carefully, designed to provoke weakness. Clara recognized men like that now. Crow once spoke exactly the same way. Like kindness was softness, like gentleness meant surrender. She lifted the rifle calmly. Not shaking, not apologizing, just steady. You should leave. The entire canyon went silent. Rourke studied her for several long seconds. Then something unexpected crossed his face. Respect. Not for the weapon, for the lack of fear behind it. Finally, he nodded once. Now I understand why he stayed. Then he rode away beneath falling snow. And all across the canyon, people slowly breathed again. Because for the first time, Clara Whitmore had stood where Takoda usually stood, and the canyon survived it. The horse returned near midnight. Alone. Snow covered its mane, while the animal wandered weakly into camp beneath lantern light. Clara recognized Takoda's saddle instantly. Fear hit her so hard she nearly dropped the lantern. Nokosi approached carefully beside her. No blood. No bullet holes. That helped little. Then Clara noticed the leather satchel tied near the saddle horn. Inside rested dried meat, extra ammunition, and a folded letter. Her name covered the front. Clara, the handwriting looked rough, uncertain. Takoda rarely wrote anything longer than supply lists. Her hands trembled while unfolding the paper beside the schoolhouse fire. The letter was short, painfully honest. Clara, if this horse returned without me, it means I stayed away longer than intended. Do not come looking. The canyon needs warmth more than ghosts. You once asked why I kept choosing mercy. Truth is, I was trying to become someone who deserved the way you looked at me. I loved you long before I believed I deserved to stay. Take care of Mato. Do not let him become what I became after war. Takoda, the fire cracked softly inside the silence afterward. Clara stared at the page for a very long time. Then finally she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears falling onto paper beside dying firelight. Because for months, years maybe, Takoda loved her while believing love itself was dangerous for people like him. Outside the schoolhouse, snow continued falling across the canyon. And somewhere very far away, Takoda still believed leaving was the kindest thing he could do. Clara packed before sunrise. No speech, no announcement. Just purpose. Nokosi found her saddling a horse near the lower ridge while wind tore through the canyon. You read the letter. Clara nodded once. And she tightened the rifle strap across the saddle. And he's wrong. The old warrior studied her quietly. He thinks he's protecting this place. He's abandoning it. Nokosi looked toward the cliffs beyond camp. He won't come back easily. Clara climbed onto the saddle. I know. The older warrior stepped closer. Rourke's men are still watching these mountains. Clara's eyes lowered briefly. Fear still existed inside her. It always would. But fear no longer controlled direction. That man survived war, she whispered. Snow. Hunters. Ghosts. Then finally. But he doesn't know how to survive being loved. The sentence silenced even Nokosi. Because it was true. Takoda understood violence, duty, loss. But not peace. Not belonging. Not staying. Clara turned the horse north toward the mountains. Toward storm clouds and frozen trails. Mato suddenly appeared running through snow behind her. Bring him home. The little boy's voice cracked. Clara swallowed hard. I will. Then she rode into the blizzard alone. And for the second time in her life, a woman once rescued from winter darkness willingly rode straight back into it for someone else. Clara found Takoda beside the battlefield 3 days later. Half frozen, exhausted, sitting beside a dying fire near the old graves. At first he thought she was another memory. You shouldn't be here. His voice sounded broken from cold and sleepless nights. Clara dismounted slowly. Neither moved closer immediately. The battlefield stretched silently around them beneath snow. Thousands of dead men buried beneath frozen earth. Takoda stared into the weak flames. I told you not to follow. Clara knelt beside the fire. And I stopped listening to stupid decisions a long time ago. A faint smile almost appeared. Almost. Then vanished. The warrior looked older somehow. Not physically. Spiritually tired. Like grief itself had finally reached his bones. For a long time neither spoke. Then Takoda finally whispered, I left my brother here. The confession barely sounded human. Just pain. Raw and ancient. Clara remained silent. So he continued. I heard him calling for me. But there were soldiers everywhere. I ran. Snow drifted softly between them. Takoda's hands tightened hard enough to shake. I spent years hunting men because I thought violence could erase that moment. His eyes lowered toward the graves. It never did. Then finally the deeper truth emerged. Samuel died because I spared Mercer. Children almost died because Boone found the canyon. Every peaceful thing near me becomes war eventually. Clara felt her own heart breaking quietly while listening, because Takoda truly believed himself cursed. Not dangerous. Cursed. The warrior stared into the fire like a man already buried beside it. I don't know how to stop bringing death home. Long silence followed. Then Clara finally answered softly. You came home every time. Takoda looked toward her slowly. Clara's eyes filled with tears beneath falling snow. That has to mean something. The storm worsened overnight. Wind screamed across the battlefield hard enough to nearly kill the fire twice. Clara and Takoda sat beneath one blanket beside the rocks while snow buried the valley deeper around them. Neither slept much. Takoda kept staring into darkness like he expected ghosts to emerge from the storm itself. Finally, near dawn, he spoke quietly. You should go back. Clara closed her eyes tiredly. No, the canyon needs you. It needs both of us. Takoda shook his head once. No, it needs peace. The sentence sharpened something inside her immediately. There it was again. That belief. That he was separate from peace, separate from love, separate from home. Clara stood suddenly beneath the storm. You don't get to decide that alone. Takoda looked up sharply. For the first time in months, anger appeared in her voice. You don't get to leave everyone behind and call it protection. Snow whipped violently through the battlefield. Takoda rose slowly to his feet. If I stay, people die. Clara stepped closer. And if you leave, people break. Silence crashed between them. Takoda looked away first. The warrior suddenly looked exhausted beyond words. Not physically, existentially tired. Like a man too worn down to keep believing redemption belonged to him. I don't know how to live after everything I've done. The honesty hurt more than shouting ever could. Clara's voice softened again. Then learn. Takoda finally met her eyes fully. And Clara saw something terrifying there. Not violence. Not rage. Hopelessness. The kind built slowly after years of surviving everyone else. She stepped forward carefully until only inches separated them. You taught me how to stop running. Snow moved softly around them. Now let someone teach you how to stay. For one long moment, the ghost hunter stood silently beneath the storm, looking less like a legend of the frontier and more like a man desperately wanting to believe home still existed for him too. The fire began after midnight. Clara smelled smoke before she saw flames. She woke instantly beneath the ruined battlefield shelter while snow hammered against the rocks outside. Then came the sound. Gunshots. Far away. South. The canyon. Takoda was already standing before she fully opened her eyes. The warrior grabbed his rifle immediately. For one terrible second, neither moved. Because both understood the truth. Rourke. Takoda's face changed instantly. Not fear. Something worse. Recognition. I should have gone back sooner. The guilt inside those words nearly crushed her. More shots echoed through the mountains. Takoda mounted his horse without another sentence. The ride back nearly killed them. Snowstorms swallowed the trails while smoke darkened the horizon ahead. By dawn, the canyon finally appeared through the blizzard. Burning. The schoolhouse roof had collapsed completely. Fire crawled through wooden beams while warriors dragged water barrels through snow and ash. Children cried everywhere. Takoda stopped his horse so suddenly the animal nearly reared. For several long seconds, the warriors simply stared. The schoolhouse. The place Clara built. Gone. Mato came running through smoke toward them, covered in soot, bleeding from one arm. Takoda. The little boy nearly collapsed against him. Takoda dropped instantly beside the child. What happened? Mato tried speaking through shaking breaths. Rourke came after dark. We got most people out. Most. The word froze Clara immediately. Takoda heard it too. Most. Silence. Then Mato's eyes lowered toward the burned ruins. And the canyon suddenly became unbearably quiet. Daniel Harper was 8 years old. Too young to die in fire and smoke. Takoda found the child's carved wooden horse near the collapsed schoolhouse wall just after sunrise. Half burned. The sight hollowed something inside him instantly. Nearby, women wrapped Daniel's small body carefully in blankets beside the river. Nobody cried loudly. Frontier grief rarely sounded dramatic. It sounded exhausted. Mato sat alone behind the stable while snow drifted softly around him. Clara approached slowly. The boy's face looked numb. He was right behind me. Clara sat beside him quietly. Mato's hands trembled violently. I heard him yelling. The little boy swallowed hard. But no Kosi grabbed me. Flashback terror filled his eyes. He said the roof was falling. Clara already understood where this was going. Mato stared into the snow. I should have gone back. There it was. Survivor's guilt. The same poison destroying Takoda. Clara pulled the child gently closer. Mato. But the little boy finally broke apart. He was scared and I left him. His voice cracked across the canyon hard enough to silence nearby conversations. Takoda heard every word from across the ruins. And the warrior froze completely. Because suddenly, he was no longer hearing Mato. He was hearing himself beside that battlefield years ago. I should have gone back. The same wound, different winter. Takoda turned away immediately, unable to breathe, unable to look at the child carrying the exact same guilt that destroyed him for years. And for the first time since Clara met him, Takoda looked truly afraid of what pain could become if left alone too long. The canyon buried Daniel before sunset. Snow covered the cedar hill quietly while the camp stood together beneath gray skies. Takoda remained near the back, silent, still, haunted. Nobody blamed him for the attack. That made everything worse. Because forgiveness often hurt more than anger. After the burial, Takoda walked through the burned canyon alone. Every ruined board felt personal. Every frightened child, every exhausted face. His failure. Clara watched him from the riverbank. The warrior moved like a ghost inside his own home now, not belonging anywhere. Nokosi approached beside her carefully. He hasn't spoken since sunrise. Clara lowered her eyes. He thinks this happened because he left. The older warrior's expression hardened. No, he thinks it happened because he exists. That sentence stayed inside Clara long after Nokosi walked away. Because it was true. Takoda no longer separated danger from himself. He had become the storm in his own mind. Later that night, Clara found him rebuilding part of the stable alone beneath lantern light. His injured hands bled through the bandages. Still he kept working. You need rest. Takoda never looked up. The roof won't rebuild itself. Clara stepped closer slowly. Neither will you. Silence. Hammer strikes echoed softly through cold air. Then finally Takoda whispered, Daniel would still be alive if I stayed. Clara's chest tightened painfully. Because this time, part of her feared he might actually believe leaving forever was mercy. The warrior finally stopped hammering. Snow drifted softly around him. I came home too late. The sentence sounded less like guilt and more like surrender. Nokosi found Takoda beside the river before dawn. The warrior sat alone sharpening a knife that did not need sharpening. Another sleepless night. The older man lowered himself carefully onto the frozen log beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The canyon remained quiet beneath fresh snow. Finally, Nokosi broke the silence. You look worse than after the war. Takoda's jaw tightened slightly. War made sense. The answer disturbed even Nokosi. Because exhausted men often trusted violence more than peace. Takoda stared toward the frozen river. When soldiers die, you expect graves. His voice sounded hollow. But children are supposed to survive places like this. Nokosi nodded slowly. Yes. Long silence followed. Then the older warrior finally turned toward him. But guilt does not honor the dead. Takoda never moved. Nokosi's voice hardened. It only buries the living beside them. The sentence hit harder than gunfire. Because Takoda suddenly saw the truth clearly. Mato carrying survivor's guilt. Clara carrying exhaustion. The canyon carrying fear. All while he disappeared deeper inside grief every day. The warrior lowered his head slowly. For the first time in years, he looked tired enough to collapse. I don't know how to stop. The confession barely rose above the wind. Nokosi studied him quietly, then finally answered, You stop surviving alone. Silence settled heavily between them. Takoda stared toward the canyon fires far below. Warm light, voices, life. Home. And suddenly the warrior realized something terrifying. He no longer knew how to sit beside peace without expecting it to disappear. Takoda tried leaving again 2 nights later. Clara heard the stable door before dawn. By the time she reached the ridge, the warrior already stood beside his horse beneath falling snow. Pack supplies. Rifle. No goodbye. Again, Clara stopped several feet away, breathing hard from the climb. You're leaving. Takoda avoided her eyes. The canyon needs time to rebuild. No, it needs you to stop running every time you hurt. The words landed sharply. Takoda tightened the saddle straps silently. Clara stepped closer. Mato barely sleeps. The children jump at every sound. And you think disappearing fixes any of that? The warrior finally looked toward her. Pain filled his exhausted face. I make this place dangerous. Clara's voice cracked immediately. No, you make this place worth protecting. Silence. Snow moved softly between them. Takoda looked away again. Always away. As if love itself became harder to survive than war. Then quietly. If I stay long enough, everyone gets buried eventually. Clara crossed the final distance instantly. Her eyes filled with tears she no longer tried hiding. You don't get to decide that for us. Takoda froze. Because nobody ever fought to keep him before. Not after the war, not after the hunting, not after all the graves. Clara's voice softened. If you leave now, Mato learns broken men should disappear. The sentence hit him harder than anything else. Below them, the canyon fires glowed gently through snowfall. Home. Still waiting. Clara touched his face carefully with freezing hands. I survived because you stayed. Takoda closed his eyes briefly. The storm moved quietly around them. And for the first time in a very long while, the warrior looked less afraid of dying and more afraid of being loved enough to remain.